Hey guys, Joelle from Scratch Farmstead here. Today we're going to be cooking up some food. It's the end of May. We are still going strong, eating from the foods that we grew in our garden. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we're cooking, what we're eating these days, and then just share some tips about what we are growing in our garden this year and some things that we're going to try out doing differently. This past year was our first year really having the goal of trying to feed our family all year round from the foods that we grew on our farm. We've always had large gardens in the past, but we've just never really had that emphasis on storage and feeding our family all year and really trying to not be dependent on the grocery store and buying outside food, but really being able to grow it ourselves and preserve it. It's been amazing. Honestly, I've been shocked at how well it's gone and how well our food has stored. Even here at the end of May, we have so much stuff that is stored so well. So like these winter squashes, these are Sibley winter squashes. They're my favorite. So this is the first year that we grew them, and we will definitely be growing them again this next year because they are awesome. They have like the best flesh that's smooth and creamy and sweet and delicious, and I swear these just get better with age. The longer they sit and they dry out a little bit, their flesh gets sweeter. So we are definitely going to be growing these Sibley winter squashes, but the other awesome thing about them is they have this really thick skin, and so they store super well. My favorite way to cook these winter squashes is just to roast them. So I peel them, scoop out all these seeds, which I'm just composting them for now. You could totally like dry these out and roast them and do more awesome things with them, but I am not going to do that today. But yeah, you could treat this like a pie pumpkin. You could roast it and you could scoop out the flesh and puree it. You could do a ton of things with these. Every week I will take at least one, if not multiple, winter squashes and just roast it. I love to have them on hand, because then it just makes really quick meals or sides. If you have a protein, you can just add some winter squash. I like to mix them with roasted beets. And so you have a little hash or a stir fry that you can mix together, roast some protein, add some eggs on top, and you have a quick and easy, super yummy meal in like literally 5 minutes. That has been one of my favorite things to do. So that's what I'm making right now that we will have on hand for the week. So with growing all of this food, one of my biggest concerns and questions we get asked the most is how did we store all of this to keep it preserved so nice? And honestly, we didn't do anything fancy. We just have a ranch house with a basement, and that's where all of this stuff was stored. We didn't have a root cellar. We didn't have any special equipment or anything like that. We just kept our food in our basement on storage shelves, and it did amazing. Everything held up super well. So we had squashes, we had tons and tons of potatoes that did really well. We did store a lot of carrots and beets that we are still eating. Those we did store in the fridge. We had a friend give us a couple fridges that they didn't need anymore, and so we were able to store our carrots and beets in the fridge, and they kept really well in there. You can see I'm peeling this off, and yeah, it's just a nice thick peel, but it also peels off super easily. We just stored everything in the basement, and that worked really well. So I think one of the things that we've considered a lot as we've been thinking about planting our garden for this year is really focusing on what varieties we're going to plant. Last year we did kind of a hodgepodge of different things. So with the winter squashes, for example, we planted 4 different winter squashes. We planted a kind of traditional butternut and acorn squash, and then we planted these, the Sibley winter, and we also planted a white round mixta. Well, we really loved all 4 varieties. The 2 that we loved the most and really stored the best and we liked the flavor of the best were the butternut squashes and these Sibley winter squashes. So these are the 2 varieties that we are going to focus on growing next year. It's kind of a similar thing for potatoes. So we ended up last year, we planted 50 pounds of potatoes, hoping we would get like 400 pounds of potatoes. Somehow, we're not even sure how this happened. We ended up with like 1,500 pounds of potatoes. They did so amazingly well. And so we have been swimming in potatoes. I think we are all, fair to say, a little bit sick of potatoes at this point, but they're really awesome. They're so energy rich, nutrient dense, so we eat a lot of potatoes, but in that, we definitely found certain varieties store better than others. Last year we grew the Adirondack Blue potato and the Magic Molly potato, and the Adirondack Blues and the Magic Molly are your purple potatoes. We grew those mainly because of their nutrient density. So those deep, rich purple colors just have more nutrients in them. They're just better for your health. We grew those for those reasons, and we love those. Those are super, super delicious. I want to say the Adirondack Blue was my favorite of the two, but we really loved them both. We actually are still eating our Magic Mollies and our Adirondack Blues. They've really held up well. They're not moldy or anything like that. They're just very dried out. So they get a little mushy, a little soft. They really shrunk a lot because pretty much I think all their water is not in them anymore. So they're just not as tasty as they were a few months ago, but they're still totally edible. We are still eating from them and enjoying them. And then the other two varieties we grew a Corolla potato, which is a yellow potato. That was probably the best tasting. It was creamy and delicious, felt like an indulgence almost. It was so good. That one also, kind of like the Magic Mollies and the Adirondacks, did not store as well. Everyone liked those the most, and so those are the ones that we used the quickest. So I saved a few for seed, for planting seed for this next year. But the ones, if you're looking for a really awesome potato specifically for storage, we would highly, highly recommend the Elba potato. We grew the most of the Elbas because of their storage capabilities, and it totally held true. They store really, really well. So here we are at the end of May. The Elbas are still really firm. Their seeds haven't gotten, or the eyes on them. Some of our potatoes, we have like potato eyes like reaching up to our ceiling, but our Elbas have they've just stored really, really well and maintained their integrity and are hard and are not that different, honestly, from what they were like in, I have a little bad spot here, what they were like when we harvested them in October or November. We will be growing a little bit of all of those varieties probably this year, but with placing an emphasis on, again, the Elba, mainly for their storage. All right, so we just finished planting our gardens this week, so this has been an exciting week. Prior to this past year, we've always mainly just done one big kind of house garden where we grow a little bit of everything. And so that was the garden we finished planting this past week. Last year we added what we call our preservation garden, where we grow more of our foods to preserve, but we haven't planted that one yet. So this past week we planted our regular garden. So we are growing tomatoes, although hopefully not as many as last year. I think I'm still having some tomato PTSD from the amount of tomatoes and tomato sauce that I canned last year. We are still totally stocked on tomato sauce for a while. While we love tomatoes and having lots of tomato sauce on hand, it was a lot of tomatoes that we canned last year. But tomatoes, we are doing sweet peppers and hot peppers, a couple rows of Brussels sprouts, which are one of our favorite things to grow, broccoli, which we kind of are not super experts at growing broccoli, but we're gonna give it a go. We've had mixed success in the past. Eggplant, cabbage, which we love to grow a bunch of cabbage. That one actually does store really, really well. I love to make a bunch of sauerkraut and preserve that as much as possible. I like to grow purple cabbage instead of your traditional green cabbage, mainly because of the nutrients. Your deep purple cabbage is just gonna be more nutrient dense than a light green cabbage. I like I believe it's called Calabose Red variety. For sure Calabose is in the name, but that is our favorite cabbage variety. And then we grew our greens, kale, chard, lettuce. I love to have those on hand because they stay really well, so I can still be picking greens in, through December sometimes in the Midwest here, depending on what our weather does. Let's see, basil. I like to grow a ton of basil to freeze to have pesto all year round, so we'll be doing that again. We're still working our way through our pesto from last year. We have a little bit left. Ground cherries, we'll grow some ground cherries. Last year was the first year we grew ground cherries, and we did really love those. They grew like gangbusters. They were fun because they're more sweet, like a fruit, so our kids really enjoyed them. We made a lot of sauces, jams, or threw them in oatmeal or things like that. Used them more like a berry, and so those were really fun. So we're gonna grow those again. Those are the main things that we planted in our regular garden. Soon we'll be planting our storage garden, hopefully in the next few days here. In our storage garden, our preservation garden, we are gonna do our carrots and our beets. So I'm gonna try to up the amount of carrots. Last year we just did one regular seed packet of carrots. So this year I think we're gonna do at least 2, if not more. I love carrots. They're so versatile. You can throw them in so many things, and I actually love just eating them, like grate them and eat them raw in a raw carrot salad, which is so yummy. So we're gonna try to up our carrots because those have stored really, really well for us in a fridge. Something that I've noticed with storage crops, like the beets and the carrots, I never wash, or really any of them. I never wash any of them. I leave all the dirt on them. I just basically harvest them, store them as they are, straight, either on our shelves or in our fridges. And that has really helped keep them preserved and storing really, really well. So we are gonna do carrots again out there. We're gonna do beets. I found we don't love beets quite as much, but we do really, really enjoy them and still use them. And I'm actually gonna roast some up here. I love roasting them with these winter squashes. They're super yummy. Yeah, so we're gonna do beets because those also have stored really well for us. And they're just so fun and pretty and add just some really lovely color to our food. So we have our garlic growing out there now that we'll harvest in another month or so here. Oh, leeks and onions. I didn't mention that we grew a bunch of leeks and onions as well this year. And so those also really preserve and store really well. I think we got a storage variety of onions. So that should hopefully be a good addition to our garden. We've never grown our own onions before, so I'm excited to give that a try. And then we will do a bunch of potatoes again. Hopefully not quite as many as last year. We don't need 1,500 pounds again. Hopefully we'll still have several hundred pounds, enough to harvest to have on hand all year. Then we are gonna do our Three Sisters garden. About a year and a half ago, we were listening to a conference. I believe it was the Moses Conference. We heard a talk by a couple Native American women, and them just talking about how they have preserved seed from their ancestors over the last several generations, and how they grow a Three Sisters garden of corn, beans, and squash, and just how beneficial that has been. And we are totally just compelled to do the same thing and to grow a Three Sisters garden. Last year was the first year that we did that. So we started with our corn. We planted our corn in the ground. And after that got established, a week or two later, we planted our beans and our squash around it. So we planted the beans next to the corn so that the beans could trellis up the corn stalks. And then we planted the squash in between the rows to grow around them. And they just work together in this awesome symbiotic system where they can benefit each other and just provide so much energy and nutrient-rich food that stores so well and has fed our family all year round. And so that was so fun, and we are going to definitely be doing that again. We'll be focusing our squashes on doing the butternut squash and these Sibley winter squash. For our corn, so this is, with the Three Sisters garden, we grow a dent corn, not a sweet corn, but a hard corn that you dry out and then you grind into cornmeal. We have grown, last year we grew a few different varieties, but one of our favorites that I think we're gonna focus on doing only this one this year is Oaxacan green dent corn. That's what I have here. And it's just this beautiful green, dark, rich green corn. It's so fun. We grind that up, we make it into cornmeal. In the past, when we've grown it, I've usually just pretty much stuck with making cornbread, which is awesome and delicious, and we all love it. But this past year, when we had tons and tons and tons of corn to work with, I'm gonna get my pans and throw these in the oven here just a second. All right, so what I like to do with roasting these winter squashes is, we roast a lot of vegetables, and I pretty much use the same method for any of my vegetables that I roast. I just stick, while the oven is warming up, I just put a scoop of lard or coconut oil or cooking fat onto the pan and let it heat up and melt. And then I just put my vegetable on there. And I like to roast these on a hot oven, like 425 degrees. And these squashes take a little longer, so these will probably take like 30, let me just grab some salt. These will probably be like 30 to 35 minutes in a 425 degree oven, but I usually check it after 25 or 30 just to see where they're at. And I just sprinkle on some salt there. But you could totally go crazy with the spices that you add. All right, and then just gonna get these in a single layer-ish and roast them up. All right, so now I'm gonna chop and roast up some beets after those squash come out. And I like to, with beets, this is kind of a bad spot here that we'll just chop off. Everyone always peels beets, which if I was like cooking them whole, I would take the skin off after. When I roast them, I usually just leave the skin on. We grew them ourselves, so I know that they're totally organic. Thing has contaminated the skin, and so there's a lot of really good nutrients in skins generally. Actually, often more nutrients than are in the flesh themselves. And so I like to, as much as I can, leave the skin on when I'm cooking. And so I go ahead and leave the beet skin on. When I roast these, you really can't even tell. My favorite way to cook beets is to just slice them pretty thin, like maybe a centimeter, maybe less, and then lay them flat on a roasting pan, just like I did those butternut squashes. Cook them at a high heat, like 425 or so, and just let them almost get crispy. Like sometimes it almost tastes like a beet chip, or just they're really nice and soft and really well cooked. That is my favorite way to roast beets. So that's what I'm gonna do with these guys. But going back to the Three Sisters garden and the corn. So we grow this Oaxacan green dent corn. That is what we're gonna stick to growing this year. But in the past, I've always just done cornbread, which is delicious and everyone loves it. We have so much corn, and since we were pretty much like 90% growing food or eating food from what we had stored, I needed to be more creative with our ways of using cornmeal. I have tried a lot of different recipes, things for like polentas and grits and baking it in different ways and adding it to different baked goods and all of that stuff, which has been really fun and led to some really delicious results. But one of my favorite, just really basic ways is to kind of make a cornmeal porridge. So that's what we're gonna be making for breakfast here this morning. To do cornmeal porridge, it's just 1 cup of cornmeal mixed with 4 cups of liquid. You could do any sort of liquid that you want, water, but what I love to do is cook the cornmeal with broth. And so that is just an awesome way to add in nutrient-dense, gelatin-rich, mineral-rich bone broth into your diet. I'm always looking for ways to add more broth in because it's so nourishing and so good for you. Pretty much anything like that, like rice, I'll cook in broth. Our cornmeal to make porridge, I'll cook in broth. That's just a really good way to add it in. You go ahead and you add 1 cup of your cornmeal for every 4 cups of liquid, and then you're just gonna heat that and stir it together on a pan on the stove. Usually I'll put it on high heat till it kind of starts to bubble, turn it down to a simmer, and just let it cook there. You'll want to stir it regularly so it doesn't stick to the pan. But that's it. It does take a little while just to thicken up, but you'll want to just get it to a nice thick porridgey sort of texture. And then you can just top it with whatever sort of protein you want or you have on hand. We have some ham thawed now from a pig that we got from a neighbor recently. And so we're gonna throw some diced ham on top, add some of our cheddar cheese from our cow that we made earlier, throw some cheddar on top, and then that's gonna be breakfast. The cornmeal porridge is awesome because it makes a really good breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's super comforting and delicious. We have our squash roasting in the oven. When that gets out, I'm gonna throw these beets in a pan, roast them up to make like a stir fry. I usually just throw them together in one pan. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and for learning about what we grew, how we preserved food, how we're still going strong on eating the food from our garden, even in May, and what we're gonna be doing this next year. So thanks for stopping by the farmstead, and we'll see you in the next video.